Millbrook Bridge had stood for over a century, its iron arches spanning the deep gorge of Black River. Local historians noted it was built in 1897, but the suicide statistics didn't begin until 1923. That was the year Eleanor Whitmore walked to the center of the bridge on a clear Tuesday morning, removed her shoes with methodical precision, and stepped over the railing. Dr. Sarah Chen first heard about the bridge from her patient, Marcus Webb. He sat in her office, hands trembling as he described his morning jog 3 weeks prior. "I wasn't suicidal," he insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm happy. I have a good job, a loving family. But when I reached the middle of that bridge, something changed." Sarah leaned forward, noting the sweat beading on Marcus's forehead, despite the cool office temperature. "Can you describe what you felt?" "It was like someone else's thoughts were in my head." "No, not thoughts, feelings. This overwhelming certainty that I needed to jump, that it was the only thing that made sense." He looked up at her, eyes wide with remembered terror. "I climbed over the railing, Dr. Chen. If that cyclist hadn't grabbed me after Marcus left," Sarah couldn't shake his story. She'd treated many patients with suicidal ideation, but this was different. The specificity of the location, the sudden onset, the complete lack of prior symptoms. That evening, she began researching the Millbrook Bridge. The numbers were staggering. In the past century, 847 people had jumped from the bridge. What made the statistics unusual wasn't just the volume. It was the pattern. 73% of the victims had no history of mental illness, no suicide notes, no warning signs. Friends and family universally expressed shock, insisting their loved ones had been happy, stable, planning for the future. Sarah's research led her to Dr. Raymond Holbrook, a retired psychiatrist who had studied the bridge phenomenon in the 1980s. They met at a coffee shop downtown, the elderly man's hands shaking slightly as he stirred his tea. "I spent 5 years investigating that bridge," he said, his voice rough with age. "Interviewed survivors, families of victims, even stationed myself there for weeks at a time. What I found," he paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. "Have you ever heard of emotional imprinting?" Sarah nodded. "The theory that intense emotions can leave a kind of psychic residue in a location. Most consider it pseudoscience," Holbrook admitted. "But that bridge, it's like it absorbed something. Every death adds to it, makes it stronger." I believe the first suicide Eleanor Whitmore her despair, her final moments of utter hopelessness, they became part of the bridge itself. "That's not possible," Sarah said, though something in her gut twisted at his words. Holbrook pulled out a worn folder, sliding it across the table. "These are my notes from 1987. I documented 17 near jumps that year. Every single person described the same thing: foreign thoughts, an overwhelming compulsion, a voice that wasn't their own urging them forward." Sarah spent the night reading Holbrook's research. Case after case painted the same picture. normal people approaching the bridge, then suddenly overwhelmed by suicidal impulses that vanished the moment they were pulled back or left the area. Some described it as a whisper, others as a scream. All agreed it didn't feel like their own mind. The next morning, Sarah decided to visit the bridge herself. She parked at the scenic overlook and walked slowly toward the iron structure. It was beautiful in the morning light, its Gothic arches casting intricate shadows on the pedestrian walkway. Cars hummed past on the vehicle lanes, their drivers oblivious to the bridge's dark reputation. As she stepped onto the walkway, Sarah felt nothing unusual. Birds chirped in the trees below. The river glittered far beneath. She walked steadily, observing other pedestrians, a mother with a stroller, an elderly couple holding hands, a businessman talking on his phone. All seemed unaffected. But as she approached the center of the bridge, something shifted. The air felt heavier, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. Her heartbeat quickened, and then, soft as a sigh, she heard it. Jump. The word didn't come from outside. It bloomed in her mind, foreign yet intimate. Sarah stopped walking, gripping the railing. The metal was cold under her palms, rough with age and weather. You want to jump. You've always wanted to jump. The thoughts felt ancient, desperate, filled with a grief so profound it made her gasp. Images flashed through her mind. A woman in 1920s clothing, tears streaming down her face. The same railing, the same view, the same unbearable weight of living. Sarah forced herself to step back, but the compulsion grew stronger. Her body moved without her permission, one foot lifting to the lower rail. The logical part of her mind screamed in protest, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming certainty that jumping was the only solution to a problem she couldn't name. Miss, are you all right? The voice shattered the spell. Sarah found herself halfway over the railing, one leg dangling above the abyss. A construction worker in a hard hat had grabbed her arm, his face creased with concern. I'm fine, she lied, allowing him to help her down. Her whole body shook with adrenaline and horror. Thank you. She fled the bridge, not stopping until she reached her car. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into research. She discovered that the bridge's construction had coincided with a tragedy. A ferry accident in 1896 that had killed 37 people, including Eleanor Whitmore's husband and 2 children. The bridge had been built on the exact spot where the ferry had capsized. She interviewed more survivors, each story adding to the pattern. The compulsion always struck at the bridge's center, the spot directly above where the ferry had gone down. Some people seemed more susceptible than others. Those dealing with loss, stress, or emotional vulnerability were particularly affected. But what disturbed Sarah most were the security tapes she managed to obtain through a contact at the city planning office. Camera footage from the past 5 years showed victim after victim approaching the center of the bridge with normal gaits, normal expressions. Invariably, they would pause. Their faces would change, not to despair, but to a strange blankness, as if they were listening to something only they could hear. The transformation from walker to jumper took an average of 43 seconds. Sarah presented her findings to the city council, arguing for barriers to be installed. The response was predictable concerns about cost, aesthetics, the bridge's historical status. One councilman even suggested that barriers would simply push suicidal individuals to other methods. "You don't understand," Sarah insisted. "These aren't suicidal people. The bridge is making them jump." Frustrated, Sarah returned to Dr. Holbrook. They sat in his study, surrounded by decades of research on the bridge. "I tried the same thing in '89, he said sadly. "They won't listen. To them, it's just statistics. They can't accept that a place can be infected." Infected, Sarah repeated, with emotion, with memory, with need. Holbrook stood slowly, retrieving a leather journal from his shelf. This was Eleanor Whitmore's diary. Her great-granddaughter gave it to me years ago. "Read the last entry." Sarah took the fragile book carefully. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant, but shaky. "The river calls to them, my babies, my sweet William. I hear them crying from beneath the water. They're cold, so cold. The bridge will bring me to them. I'll step off and fall into their arms. We'll be together in the dark. Forever in the dark. The water doesn't give them back, but it will take me to them. I know others will follow. The river is hungry, and the bridge must feed it. This is the only way." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She's not just talking about suicide. She's talking about sacrifice. Holbrook nodded grimly. "Every death feeds something, makes the compulsion stronger. I believe Eleanor's grief and desperation created a kind of beacon, a psychic wound that draws others to repeat her final act." That night, Sarah dreamed of the bridge. She stood at its center, but it was different, older, made of wood instead of iron. The river below was black and still, and shapes moved beneath its surface. She looked down and saw faces in the water, hundreds of them, mouths open in silent screams. Eleanor Whitmore was among them, her eyes fixed on Sarah with terrible purpose. "Join us," the faces seemed to say. "The water is patient. The bridge provides." Sarah woke gasping, the taste of river water in her mouth. The next day brought news that shook her to her core. Marcus Webb was dead. He had returned to the bridge at 3 a.m. and jumped. His wife said he had been doing better, seeing improvement from therapy, planning a vacation with the family. Sarah attended the funeral, watching Marcus's children cry over their father's casket. The guilt was suffocating. She had failed him, failed to protect him from something she barely understood herself. After the service, Marcus's wife approached her. "He left this for you," she said, handing Sarah an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dr. Chen, it's calling me back. I try not to listen, but it's in my dreams now. Eleanor shows me how peaceful it is in the dark, how all the pain stops. I know it's not my thought, but I can't tell the difference anymore. Please understand, this isn't suicide. It's something else, something older. Don't let others follow. Find a way to break the chain. Marcus, Sarah made a decision. If the city wouldn't act, she would. She began a grassroots campaign, organizing volunteers to patrol the bridge during peak hours. She created a website documenting the phenomenon, warning people about the compulsion. She even convinced a local news station to run a segment on the bridge's unusual statistics. But the deaths continued. The bridge's hunger seemed insatiable. One autumn evening, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar, Dr. Holbrook. I need to show you something, he said urgently. Come to the bridge. Midnight. That seems like exactly what we shouldn't do, Sarah protested. Trust me. There's something you need to see, something I discovered just before I retired. I was too afraid to pursue it then, but now we're running out of time. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed. She arrived at the bridge just before midnight to find Holbrook waiting, a large bag at his feet. What is this about? She asked. The ferry accident, he said, pulling out what looked like old diving equipment. It wasn't an accident. I found records, hidden in the Historical Society's archives. The ferry was sabotaged. A man named Theodore Crane. He was obsessed with Eleanor Whitmore. When she rejected him, he ensured her family would die on that ferry. Eleanor never knew. She blamed herself, thought she had somehow caused their deaths by wishing to be free of her marriage. That guilt, compounded by grief, Holbrook attached a waterproof camera to the diving helmet. I believe her spirit, or echo, or whatever you want to call it, is trapped here. Fed by every death, growing stronger, pulling others to share her fate. What are you planning to do? I'm going down there, he said simply. To the ferry wreck. If I can find evidence of the sabotage, prove Eleanor's family was murdered, maybe. Maybe it will give her peace. Break the cycle. That's insane. The current alone could kill you, not to mention, I'm 87 years old, Dr. Chen. I've spent 40 years studying this bridge. If I can stop even one more death, he smiled sadly. Besides, I've been feeling the call myself lately. Better to go down fighting than to go over the rail. Before Sarah could stop him, Holbrook had suited up and was lowering himself over the railing on a rope system he had somehow pre-installed. She watched in horror and fascination as he descended into the black water below. Minutes passed like hours. Sarah monitored the rope, which remained taut with Holbrook's weight. Then, suddenly, it went slack. Dr. Holbrook, she called, but there was no response. She was debating calling for help when the rope suddenly jerked. Slowly, painfully, Holbrook emerged from the water. Sarah helped haul him back onto the bridge, where he collapsed, coughing up river water. Did you find anything? She asked. He nodded weakly, pulling out the waterproof camera. The ferry, it's still there. And I found this. He produced a corroded metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents, including a confession from Theodore Crane, written days before his own death by drowning. He couldn't live with what he'd done, Holbrook wheezed, threw himself in the river. His guilt, Aliner's grief, it all mixed together in this place as they sat on the bridge, reading Crane's confession by flashlight. Sarah felt something shift in the air. The oppressive weight that always hung over the bridge's center seemed to lift slightly. The whispers in her mind fell silent. "We need to make this public," she said. "Let people know the truth." But as she spoke, she noticed Holbrook's expression. He was staring at something behind her, his face pale with shock. Sarah turned. A woman stood at the bridge's center, translucent, dressed in 1920s clothing. Aliner Whitmore. Her face was no longer twisted with grief, but filled with a terrible understanding. She looked at the confession in Sarah's hands, then at the river below. For a long moment, the ghost stood perfectly still. Then, instead of jumping, she began to fade. As she disappeared, Sarah heard a sound like a sigh, not of despair, but of relief, of release. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. The compulsion stopped. People could walk across the bridge without feeling the urge to jump. The whispers fell silent. The psychic wound that had festered for nearly a century finally began to heal. Sarah published her findings, along with the historical documents Holbrook had recovered. The city finally agreed to install preventive barriers, though they were no longer urgently needed. The bridge's dark reputation slowly faded, replaced by a different kind of notoriety. As a case study in how unresolved trauma can echo through generations, Dr. Holbrook passed away peacefully 6 months later. At his funeral, Sarah spoke about his courage, his dedication to understanding the incomprehensible. She didn't mention that, in his final days, he had told her about dreams where Aliner Whitmore came to thank him, no longer bound to the bridge, but finally free to join her family in whatever comes after. The Millbrook Bridge still stands, carrying thousands of people safely across the gorge each day. Sometimes, on foggy mornings, locals claim to see a woman in old-fashioned clothing standing at the rail, but she's not looking down anymore. She's looking up toward the sky, a slight smile on her face. The bridge no longer makes people jump. The chain has been broken, but Sarah often thinks about all the bridges in the world, all the places where tragedy has left its mark. She wonders how many other Aliner Whitmores are out there, trapped in their final moments, pulling others into their pain. She continues her work, now specialized in what she carefully terms location-based psychological phenomena. She receives calls from around the world, a hotel in Japan where guests report overwhelming sadness, a park in Germany where children refuse to play, a stretch of road in Mexico where drivers feel compelled to accelerate into the guardrail. Each case is different, but the pattern remains the same. Trauma leaves traces. Pain can take root in place as well as people. And sometimes the only way to heal is to uncover the truth buried beneath years of suffering. The Millbrook Bridge taught her that. It taught her that places can be wounded, can bleed emotion and memory into the present. But it also taught her that such wounds can be healed, that understanding and acknowledgement can break even the strongest chains. She keeps a photo on her desk, the bridge on a sunny day, people walking across without fear. A reminder that even the darkest places can find light again, that even the most persistent ghosts can finally find peace. But late at night, when she's alone with her research, Sarah sometimes wonders about the water below, about what might still be down there in the dark, waiting. The bridge no longer feeds it, but rivers have long memories, and somewhere in the depths, the ferry still rests on the riverbed, a monument to how one act of selfish cruelty can echo through a century of pain.